Eliza Palmer clutched her small hands into fists as the laughter of the ranch hands echoed across the dusty yard, their mockery cutting deeper than any knife could. At just 5 feet tall, she'd heard it all before, but that didn't make their words sting any less as she stood among the towering men of Silverstone Ranch in the spring of 1875. "Might as well send you back to town with the children, little lady," called one weathered cowhand, tipping his hat back. "Don't reckon you'll be much help round here 'cept maybe for crawling under the fence to fetch strays." Eliza lifted her chin, the Montana sun highlighting the determination in her eyes. "I came to work, and work I shall. My height has nothing to do with my ability to earn my keep." She had traveled too far and sacrificed too much to be turned away now. After her father's death 3 months prior, the small general store they'd run together in Helena had been seized by creditors, leaving her with nothing but a worn satchel of clothes and her father's pocket watch. The advertisement for ranch help had been her salvation, or so she'd thought until arriving to find herself the object of ridicule. "Miss Palmer," came a deep voice from behind the crowd. The ranch hands parted as Samuel Pierce, foreman of Silverstone Ranch, strode forward. At 6 feet 3 inches, he towered over her, his broad shoulders blocking the sun and casting her in shadow. His eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sky, assessed her with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Pierce," she responded, refusing to be intimidated by his size or authority. "These men seem to think you're too small for ranch work," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent yard. "And you, sir, what do you think?" Eliza challenged, meeting his gaze directly, a hint of something respect perhaps flickered across his features. "I think size isn't what makes a person useful. It's heart, determination, and willingness to learn." He turned to address the men. "Miss Palmer will be helping Mrs. Watkins in the main house and assisting with the garden and chickens." The disappointment must have shown on her face, for he added quietly, "Prove yourself there, and we'll see about more." Later that evening, as Eliza unpacked her meager belongings in the small room at the back of the cook's quarters, Mrs. Watkins, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, offered what comfort she could. "Don't you mind those men, dear. They've got more brawn than brains sometimes," she said, helping Eliza make up her bed. "Samuel's fair, though. He'll give you a proper chance if you earn it." "I didn't come all this way to pluck chickens and pull weeds," Eliza sighed, smoothing the rough blanket. "My father taught me to ride before I could walk. I can rope a steer and mend tack as well as any man," Mrs. Watkins smiled knowingly. "Then show them, not with words but with work." The next morning dawned bright and early. Eliza was up before sunrise, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs before most of the ranch hands had even stirred from their bunks. By the time Mrs. Watkins arrived to start breakfast, Eliza had already collected the eggs, drawn fresh water, and started the kitchen fire. "My, you are eager," Mrs. Watkins remarked with approval. "I finish my assigned work quickly so I might find ways to be more useful," Eliza explained. After breakfast, she washed the dishes in record time and hurried to the garden, where she spent the morning weeding and watering with efficient precision. When that was done, she found herself with free time and wandered toward the corral, where Samuel Pierce was working with a spirited young mare. Eliza watched from the fence as he spoke softly to the nervous animal, his movements gentle despite his imposing stature. The mare snorted and pranced, uncertain and fearful. After several minutes with little progress, Samuel caught sight of Eliza. "Finished your duties already, Miss Palmer?" he called, keeping a firm grip on the lead rope as the mare tossed her head. "Yes, sir. Thought I might observe if that's all right." Samuel nodded, then cursed under his breath as the mare reared slightly. "This one's proving difficult, too skittish for her own good." Before she could stop herself, Eliza slipped between the fence rails and approached slowly. "May I try?" Samuel's eyebrows rose, but after a moment's hesitation he handed her the rope. "Be careful, she's strong enough to drag you." Eliza took the lead and stood still, making herself as small and unthreatening as possible. She began to hum softly, a lullaby her mother had sung before consumption had taken her years ago. The mare's ears flicked forward in curiosity. "That's right," Eliza murmured, gradually moving closer. "I'm not very big, am I? Nothing to fear from someone like me." Incredibly, the mare lowered her head, nostrils flaring as she took in Eliza's scent. Within minutes, Eliza was stroking the animal's neck, still humming that gentle tune. Samuel watched in amazement. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Seems your size might be an advantage after all." Eliza glanced up at him, a smile blooming on her face. "Sometimes being small means you're less threatening. People and animals don't feel the need to defend themselves against you." "People underestimate you," Samuel said, not a question but a realization. "All my life," she confirmed, still stroking the mare. "Including you, Mr. Pierce." His lips quirked into something almost like a smile. "Samuel, call me Samuel." From that day forward, Eliza's duties expanded. She still helped Mrs. Watkins with household chores, but each afternoon she worked with the more difficult horses, her gentle touch and unthreatening stature proving invaluable with the skittish animals. The ranch hands still made the occasional joke about her height, but there was less mockery in their tone and more grudging respect. Samuel, too, began to see her differently. He found himself watching her work, admiring her determination and the grace with which she moved. She never complained, even when tasks were difficult, instead finding creative ways to accomplish what her limited reach or strength might otherwise have prevented. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after Eliza's arrival, Samuel found her in the barn, attempting to reach a saddle on a high rack. She had dragged a crate over and was precariously balanced on her tiptoes, fingers just shy of the leather. "Allow me," he said, stepping forward and easily lifting the saddle down. "This one's too heavy for you anyway." "I would have managed," Eliza replied, a hint of frustration in her voice. "I don't doubt it," he said, surprising her. "But accepting help doesn't make you weak, Miss Palmer. Even I need assistance sometimes." She looked skeptical. "You, the great Samuel Pierce, needing help, I find that hard to believe." "Believe it," he said, setting the saddle on a nearby rack. "Running this ranch takes many hands, large and small. No one person can do it all." Eliza considered his words. "My father used to say something similar. He said even the biggest tasks can be accomplished if you're willing to ask for help when needed." Samuel nodded. "Sounds like a wise man." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said softly. "He would have liked it here, I think. He always loved wide, open spaces." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Samuel cleared his throat. "I'm riding out to check the north pasture tomorrow. There's a section of fence that needs mending. Would you care to join me? If you're as handy with fence repair as you are with those horses, I could use the company." Eliza's heart quickened at the invitation. "I'd like that very much." The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day for riding. Eliza wore her only pair of trousers, patched at the knees but serviceable, and a faded blue shirt that had once belonged to her father. She had tied her chestnut hair back with a ribbon, though stubborn wisps already escaped to frame her face. Samuel was waiting by the corral with 2 saddled horses, his own sturdy gelding, and the mare Eliza had gentled, now significantly calmer under saddle. "Thought you might like to ride Willow," he said, handing Eliza the reins. "She's taken quite a shine to you." Eliza stroked the mare's soft muzzle, "as I have to her." She glanced up at the saddle, noticing that Samuel had adjusted the stirrups to accommodate her shorter legs. The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed her. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, the vastness of the Montana landscape stretching before them in a tapestry of greens and golds. Samuel pointed out landmarks and boundaries, sharing the history of the ranch and his plans for its future. "The owner, Mr. Henderson, lives back east," he explained. "Hasn't set foot on the property in 5 years, sends instructions by post and expects results. As long as the ranch turns a profit, he leaves the running of it to me." "That's a lot of responsibility," Eliza observed. Samuel shrugged his broad shoulders. "It's a good arrangement. I make decisions as I see fit, and so far he hasn't complained. They reached the damaged section of fence before noon. A fallen tree had broken through several posts, leaving a gap large enough for cattle to wander through. Samuel dismounted and helped Eliza down, his hands spanning her waist easily as he lifted her from the saddle. The unexpected contact sent a flutter through her stomach, but she composed herself quickly, eager to prove her usefulness. Together they set about clearing the fallen tree and assessing the damage. We'll need to replace these 3 posts, Samuel decided, pointing to the splintered wood, and restring the wire. For the next several hours they worked side by side under the warm sun. Samuel dug new post holes while Eliza prepared the replacement posts, cutting away damaged bark with a sharp knife. When it came time to set the posts, Samuel drove them into the ground with powerful blows from a heavy mallet, his shirt darkening with sweat as he worked. Eliza found herself watching the play of muscles across his back, the way his strong hands gripped the tool with confidence. She quickly looked away when he turned, hoping he hadn't noticed her staring. They ate a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, sitting in the shade of an old oak tree. The companionable silence between them was comfortable, broken only by the occasional call of a bird overhead or the distant lowing of cattle. "You work hard," Samuel remarked as they packed away the remains of their meal. "Harder than most of the men I've hired." "I have more to prove," Eliza replied simply. Samuel studied her for a long moment. "Not to me, not anymore." The sincerity in his voice made her glance up, meeting his gaze. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding and perhaps something more, before Samuel looked away, clearing his throat. "We'd better finish that fence before sundown," he said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. As they rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, Eliza felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. Samuel rode beside her, occasionally pointing out a hawk circling overhead or a deer watching warily from the edge of the trees. In those moments, the difference in their height seemed inconsequential. 2 people sharing the beauty of the land they both loved, back at the ranch. As they unsaddled their horses in the dim light of the stable, Samuel hesitated, as if wanting to say something more. Instead, he simply touched the brim of his hat in farewell and strode toward the main house, leaving Eliza to wonder about the meaning behind his lingering glance. The weeks that followed saw a subtle shift in their relationship. Samuel sought her company more frequently, finding tasks that required both of them working together. The ranch hands noticed the foreman's attention to the small woman, but were wise enough to keep their observations to themselves, at least when Samuel was within earshot. Mrs. Watkins, however, was less reticent. "The way that man looks at you when you're not watching," she remarked one evening as she and Eliza prepared supper. "Like you're a puzzle he can't quite solve but enjoys contemplating." Eliza felt her cheeks warm. "He simply realized I'm capable, despite my size." "Oh, he's realized something, all right," Mrs. Watkins chuckled, "and it has precious little to do with your capabilities as a ranch hand." Before Eliza could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Samuel himself entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes found Eliza immediately, a smile softening his usually stern features. "Evening, ladies," he greeted them. "Something smells mighty fine in here." "Beef stew and fresh bread," Mrs. Watkins replied, shooting Eliza a knowing look. "Eliza made the bread herself this morning." "Is that so?" Samuel's approving gaze made Eliza's pulse quicken. "A woman of many talents, our Miss Palmer." "Not so many," Eliza demurred. "Just determined to be useful." "You're far more than merely useful," Samuel said, his voice dropping slightly. "This ranch runs smoother since your arrival. The men work harder, the horses are better trained, and even the food tastes better." Mrs. Watkins cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll just check on that stew," she muttered, moving to the far side of the kitchen to give them a moment of privacy. Samuel stepped closer, lowering his voice. I was wondering if you might join me for a ride on Sunday afternoon. There's a spot up in the hills I'd like to show you. Prettiest view in the territory, especially this time of year with the wildflowers blooming. The invitation, clearly personal rather than work-related, sent a thrill through Eliza. I'd like that very much, she replied, his smile broadened, reaching his eyes and transforming his face. Good. That's good. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. Eliza wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered along the collar. She had even indulged in the luxury of washing her hair the night before, and now it hung in soft waves down her back, restrained only by a blue ribbon that matched her dress. Samuel was waiting by the corral, dressed in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing. He held the reins of both horses, and Eliza noticed that Willow now sported a side saddle. I found it in the tack room, Samuel explained, following her gaze. Belonged to Mrs. Henderson years ago before she decided ranch life wasn't to her liking. Thought you might be more comfortable riding in a dress this way. Eliza was touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. It's been some time since I rode side saddle, but I'm sure it will come back to me. With gentle hands, Samuel helped her mount, ensuring she was settled comfortably before swinging up onto his own horse. They rode at a leisurely pace, heading toward the foothills that rose to the west of the ranch. The day was perfect warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. After about an hour's ride, they came to a small stream fed by mountain snowmelt. Samuel dismounted and helped Eliza down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. He tied the horses where they could drink and graze, then offered Eliza his hand. It's a short climb from here, he said, but worth every step. Hand in hand, they made their way up a narrow path that wound through stands of aspen and pine. The trail steepened, and Samuel's grip tightened reassuringly on her smaller hand. When she stumbled once on loose gravel, he steadied her immediately, his other hand coming to rest at the small of her back. Careful, he murmured, his face close to hers. I've got you. The warmth in his voice sent a pleasant shiver through Eliza. They continued upward until the trees thinned and suddenly opened onto a natural clearing at the edge of a bluff. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to the vast prairie, with the ranch buildings tiny in the distance and the mountains rising majestically to the west. "Oh, Samuel," Eliza breathed, moving forward to take in the panorama. "It's magnificent." "I come here sometimes when decisions weigh heavy," Samuel said, stepping up beside her. "Helps to see the bigger picture." Eliza glanced up at him, squinting slightly in the sunlight. "And do you find answers?" "Sometimes," he replied, looking down at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Lately, I find more questions than answers." "What kind of questions?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Questions about the future. About what I want versus what I've always thought I needed." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "About whether a woman like you could ever see yourself making a life with a man like me." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "A woman like me, strong, determined, compassionate." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "A woman who changed everything by simply being herself." "And a man like you," she prompted, heart hammering against her ribs. A hint of vulnerability crossed his features. "A man who thought he knew exactly what his life would be, until a slip of a woman arrived and turned his carefully ordered world upside down." Eliza felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I think a woman like me could very easily see herself making a life with a man like you, Samuel Pierce. In fact, she's been hoping you might ask." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Samuel bent down and pressed his lips to hers in a tender, questioning kiss. Eliza responded with a sweetness that made him groan softly before gathering her closer in his arms. When they finally broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. "You know what I realized, Eliza Palmer? For all my height and strength, I was small before you came. Small in my thinking, small in my dreams. You may be little in stature, but you've got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. So, you might say I lift your world, she teased gently, remembering the men's mockery on her first day. Samuel laughed, a rich, deep sound that echoed across the hilltop. That's exactly what I'd say. You lift my world, Eliza, in ways I never imagined possible. They spread a blanket Samuel had brought in his saddlebag and shared a picnic of cold chicken, bread, and fresh strawberries, a special treat he'd arranged with Mrs. Watkins. They talked for hours as the sun made its way across the sky, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Samuel spoke of his dreams for the ranch, how he hoped to buy it outright from Mr. Henderson someday. Eliza told him of her love of books and how she'd always wanted to travel, but now found herself wanting nothing more than to build a life right here. As the afternoon waned, Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object which he pressed into Eliza's palm. It was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a horse, hanging from a fine chain. I had this made in town last week, he explained as Eliza examined it with wonder. Reminded me of how you tamed Willow that first day and how you've been taming me ever since. Eliza laughed softly. Are you saying you were wild, Samuel Pierce? Not wild, he corrected, helping her fasten the necklace around her throat. Just unfinished, incomplete. And now? She asked, looking up at him through her lashes. His expression grew serious. Now I know what was missing. The ride back to the ranch was filled with stolen glances and brushed hands, the newness of their declared feelings lending a magical quality to the golden evening light. As they approached the ranch, reality intruded slightly on their private happiness. The men will talk, Samuel said, a hint of concern in his voice. I don't want them disrespecting you. Eliza sat straighter in her saddle. Let them talk. I've proven my worth to them and to myself. Their gossip can't touch what we have. Samuel's admiring gaze warmed her from the inside out. Have I told you how remarkable you are, Eliza Palmer? Not in those exact words, she replied with a smile, but you've made me feel it. Their courtship progressed swiftly after that day. Samuel was not a man to hide his feelings once they were acknowledged, and Eliza found herself the recipient of small, thoughtful gestures that spoke volumes of his care for her. A footstool appeared mysteriously in the kitchen when she needed to reach high shelves. The ranch's blacksmith was instructed to make her a set of tools sized for her smaller hands. Every evening, Samuel would find a moment to speak with her privately, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes for hours after the day's work was done. The ranch hands, after an initial flurry of good-natured teasing, accepted the relationship with surprising grace. As one weather-beaten cowboy put it, ain't never seen the boss smile so much. Reckon Miss Palmer's good medicine. 4 months after Eliza's arrival at Silverstone Ranch, on a warm August evening, Samuel proposed properly. He had taken her back to their hilltop, where wildflowers now carpeted the clearing in a riot of color. Kneeling before her despite her protests that the ground would dirty his good trousers, he presented a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond. I know I'm rushing, he admitted, but when something feels as right as this, why wait? Marry me, Eliza, be my wife, my partner, my heart. Tears of joy streaming down her face, Eliza nodded, too overcome for words. When she finally found her voice, she whispered, Yes, Samuel. 1,000 times yes. They were married in October when the aspen trees turned gold against the evergreen backdrop of pine and spruce. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with Mrs. Watkins proudly serving as Eliza's matron of honor and the ranch hands cleaned up in their Sunday best, awkwardly shifting their weight as they witnessed the exchange of vows. The letter that arrived from Mr. Henderson a week after the wedding contained not only congratulations, but an unexpected proposition. Samuel could buy the ranch over time, with payments to be made annually from the profits. It was more than they had dared hope for, and they celebrated the news by planning improvements to the main house, which would now truly be their home. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Eliza, now Mrs. Pierce, found the cold months surprisingly sweet. Evenings were spent by the fire, planning for spring, for the future they would build together. Samuel taught her to play chess, and she read aloud from the books he'd begun ordering from back east, expanding the small library they were building. In their bedroom, their difference in size ceased to matter at all, as they discovered the perfect ways their bodies fit together, passion and tenderness intermingling in the quiet hours of darkness. Samuel's strength cradled Eliza's smaller frame with reverence, while her gentle hands mapped the contours of his body with loving care. They learned each other completely, finding joy in their differences as much as in their commonalities. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, foals in the stables, and the news that Eliza herself was with child, due in late autumn. Samuel's reaction to the announcement was everything she could have hoped for. He lifted her gently in his arms, spinning her around before setting her carefully back on her feet, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "A baby," he marveled, placing his large hand over her still flat stomach. "Our baby." As her belly grew, Samuel became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and lift less. Eliza bore his concern with good humor, reminding him that women had been having babies since time began and most didn't have the luxury of resting. "Besides," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "being small has its advantages in this situation too." Samuel raised a questioning eyebrow. "Doctor?" "Wilson says smaller women often have an easier time carrying high," she explained, running her hands over the neat curve of her stomach. "Less strain on the back since the weight is distributed differently." "Still," Samuel insisted, "no more climbing on crates to reach things. Promise me, Eliza." She smiled indulgently. "I promise to ask for help when needed, but I won't sit idle for months, Samuel. This ranch is my home too, and there's work I can still do safely." They compromised, as they had learned to do on matters large and small. Eliza continued to oversee the household and gardens, worked with the horses she had trained, and kept the ranch accounts a task she had taken over shortly after their marriage, revealing a natural aptitude for numbers that impressed even Samuel. On a crisp November morning, with the first snow of the season dusting the ground, Eliza gave birth to a daughter after a surprisingly quick labor. They named her Charlotte, after Eliza's mother, but from the first moment, Samuel called her Charlie, delighting in her tiny perfection. "She has your hands," he observed as they sat together by the fire, Eliza nursing the infant while Samuel watched in wonder. "Small but strong. And your eyes," Eliza added, stroking the baby's downy head. "She'll be tall like her father, I think." Samuel leaned over to kiss his wife's forehead. "Small or tall, she'll be perfect, just like her mother." Charlie grew quickly, a happy, sturdy child with her father's height and her mother's determined spirit. By her first birthday, she was toddling around the ranch, fearless and curious about everything. Samuel doted on his daughter shamelessly, while Eliza ensured the child learned the value of hard work alongside the joy of play. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Samuel Jr., whom they called Jamie to distinguish him from his father. The family was now complete: a tall father, a small mother, and 2 children who seemed determined to split the difference, growing like weeds in the fertile soil of their parents' love. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Samuel's careful management and Eliza's shrewd accounting allowed them to expand their holdings, buy better breeding stock, and hire more hands. Silverstone Ranch became known throughout the territory for its quality horses and cattle, drawing buyers from as far away as Chicago. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Eliza with the deed to the ranch. Paid in full, Silverstone was now truly theirs. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch swing he had built the summer before, Eliza tucked against Samuel's side as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" Samuel asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Eliza considered the question. Not specifically, no. When I arrived here, I was just hoping to earn enough to survive. I never dreamed I'd find everything I never knew I wanted. Samuel chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her cheek where it rested on his chest. I remember thinking you were too small to be of much use around here. And now, she prompted, tilting her head to look up at him, his expression softened as he gazed down at her. Now I know that the smallest things can carry the greatest weight. You lifted my world then, Eliza Pierce, and you lift it still, every single day. She reached up to touch his face, fingers tracing the lines that 10 years had etched around his eyes, lines of laughter, of squinting into the sun, of a life well lived. And you gave me a place where my size never mattered, where what counted was how big we could dream together. Samuel bent to kiss her, his lips as tender as that first kiss on the hilltop a decade before. When they parted, he whispered against her hair, "Big dreams from a small package." "That's my Eliza. And a big heart in an even bigger man," she replied, settling contentedly against him as the porch swing rocked gently in the evening breeze. "That's my Samuel." Together they watched the stars wheel overhead, secure in the knowledge that what they had built, this ranch, this family, this love would endure long after they were gone, a legacy as vast as the Montana sky and as enduring as the land itself.